Most cars come with a list of options, but what happens when there's not enough? We'll tell you this week on Motoring 2002.
TSN's Motoring 2002 is brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas. Keep a good thing going. Go Midas.
You know, when I was growing up, both my sisters played the piano, at least at the time. That's what they told me they were doing. And every now and then the piano sounded a little off key. Once my dad was convinced it wasn't an operator's problem, he brought in the piano tuner. I mean, you want to get out what you put into something. Well, it's the same in the car industry. For years, people have been buying a car in the showroom and then dropping a new engine in, adding suspension, maybe taking it to the chop shop. Not always legal, mind you, but people wanted to get the ultimate performance out of their car. Well, you know, car companies aren't oblivious to this, and that's why Ford has its SVT division, BMW the M-Class, just to name a couple. Either way, these cars are built for people with a fat wallet and a passion for driving. Well, this week we're at the Shannonville racetrack just outside of Belleville, where Mercedes-Benz has invited automotive journalists from across the country to drive some of their cars that have been customized by one of the world's most famous tuners.
Drivers ready. 3, 2, 1, go.
AMG actually was founded in 1967, and AMG at that time stood for racing. And AMG now is a company with 500 employees, being part of the big Daimler Chrysler company. And AMG now stands for the Performance Mercedes-Benz.
We bought the company a few years ago and we changed it. The sales have gone up through the roof. We have now coverage on AMG on all our models. Over here we're selling all the 4-door sedans and the coupes in AMG versions, different engine versions. AMG is for us the performance. That's the cars who actually put that particular part on our cars, which is performance, torque, horsepower, speed, sporty driving, something different.
An AMG car is not a tune car. Like tune cars do not fulfill safety standards. So that's something where AMG is different. All the electronic systems work the same or especially adapted to the new environment, and that's the big difference. Also, we have to crash each AMG Mercedes. We have to do everything to make sure that it is a Mercedes-Benz in the end that rolls off the factory.
A car like an AMG car in a model series usually has a lifespan of 2-3 years, and then the demand disappears. That's, for example, something you have to manage with these cars.
If you talk about increase in power, it's usually between 40 and 50% over the next standard car. The torque is even more impressive, and that's what I said before. Torque is what we feel is something we should concentrate on, because torque is what you feel every day, daily driving, when you start the engine and you go, the first meter, you know, torque. And that's why we have all our engines, you know, being developed to be torque oriented. Of course, we have a lot of horsepower. That's a wonderful side effect. So the cars are really fast too. When you start an AMG engine idling, you have more torque than 90% of all the cars on the road going full speed. That's an AMG.
Everybody's competitive.
You betcha. That red mist starts going.
Drivers ready. 3, 2, 1,
I think you got me that time.
Inviting the press to an event like this is just simply to show you what opportunities exist in the area of performance if you come to Mercedes-Benz.
Last year, as I said, was 11,500 cars. This year we'll be heading towards 19,000 units. The North American market is by far the biggest single market for us, between 50, 60, sometimes 70% of the world market.
Life is full of irony, and the faster we go, the more ironic it gets. More later on Kenzie's Corner.
You know, for years Land Rover struggled with just the Discovery and the Range Rover as their primary tools in terms of sales. This week on Test Drive we take a look at the Freelander, a vehicle I have high hopes for, especially when it comes to building that sales record.
The Freelander has a look of a Land Rover, but with a twist. It sits noticeably lower than the rest of the range. It also rides on a fully independent McPherson strut suspension, meaning that the old solid axles relied upon before have been dumped. The result is a remarkably civilized ride on road, and when off-road, the long travel, a full 9 inches in the rear, soaks up the lumpy stuff with suitable aplomb. The steering is also a highlight and better than most SUVs, featuring a rack and pinion steering design that brings a defined on-center feel without the twitchiness that's so common. You know, the Freelander may be an SUV, but it's certainly one of the more flatter and predictable through the pylons. It really is quite a ride. The other area the Freelander scores well is the braking system. It features front discs, rear drums and the Tevis Mark 20 anti-lock system. Not only is the pedal firm and easily modulated, it puts a crisp halt to the proceedings, requiring just 111 feet from 80k. Bonus points for the anti-lock system, as it stays out of the equation until absolutely necessary, even when off-road.
This Freelander does not feature a low-range gear set in the transfer case, and so to limit the speed at which you hurtle down hills, Land Rover have added hill descent control in reverse and first. When you pull it back into first, the anti-lock brakes limit the speed of the descent to less than 8 kilometers an hour.
The all-wheel drive system uses a viscous coupling and the anti-lock brakes to shuttle the power around. While it works effectively, the tyres let the side down as they're more at home on the tarmac than a muddy field, so be warned. A 2.5-litre V6 that's married to a 5-speed automatic transmission supplies the motivation. With 175 horses and a respectable 177 pounds-feet of torque on tap, the Freelander brings brisk acceleration, but only if thrashed. The problem is that this modus operandi sucks back the gas like there's no tomorrow. The weak link is the transmission. The shifts are at times abrupt, especially between second and third, and the kickdown is not very willing to oblige. A faster mode of shifting is available, however, through the manumatic portion of the gearbox's design. How many will actually make use of this mode is questionable.
The Freelander comes very nicely attired, especially if you go with the top-of-the-line HSE. When you do, you get full leather, two-tone steering wheel and a very nice Harman Kardon audio unit. The problem is, from an ergonomic perspective, well, it's less than intuitive. First of all, the power window switches sit between the seats rather than on the door where they should. The whole center stack is too far away from the driver, meaning you have to actually reach for most of the controls. And this thing up here, well, believe it or not, this afterthought are 2 of the 4 cup holders.
While the Freelander does come with dual front airbags and adjustable upper seatbelt anchors, the lack of side bags and/or side curtains surprises, especially as some of the key competition offers this stuff and invariably as standard items. Ford's own Explorer being a notable example. When you cross the 40,000 threshold, items like this should be in place. Likewise, automatic headlights. With Freelander, you must remember to turn the lights off. What a pity.
On-road, this Freelander is actually quite accomplished. Off-road, however, it suffers because of the lack of a low-range gear set in the transfer case. In short, it's more of a yuppie ute than it is a serious off-roader.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns visual inspection of your tires. As you can see on this sport utility vehicle, because of the high ground clearance and ride height, we're afforded a real good look at the tire treads. It's not the same though on a car. In many cases, the bodywork hides a real clear view of the tire treads. So in some cases, you could have a very worn tire or an unevenly worn tire to the point of being unsafe and not have a real good look at it. The time to look at these tires is when the vehicle's in for routine servicing. Oil changes or any routine servicing are a good point to have a look at the tires when the vehicle's up on the hoist. Here's a couple of tires that were recently removed from vehicles. You can see that this one has extreme wear on this side and a little bit of steel cord hanging out, a little bit of tread remaining over here. But this one's completely bald all the way around with an 1.5 inch strip of steel belts hanging out of the tire because of the extreme tire wear. Now, just before this tire blew, it was still very unsafe to be driving on a tire with no tread like this, and there's no excuse for this happening. You don't want to be on the road with a tire with this amount of tread depth. And a visual inspection will pick up things like this, as well as objects that could be in the tire puncturing it or cracking it. Something you should do periodically, as well as your monthly tire pressure check. That's your Midas tip of the week.
If you ever travel to Trollhättan, you'll notice an abundance of Saabs. Not surprising, considering this is the home of the Swedish company. Trouble is, Saab wishes you were seeing more vehicles on streets around the world, and so does General Motors, who own the company. It's estimated that Saab has cost General Motors almost $2 billion since the relationship began in 1989. So it might be expected if Saab was feeling a little pressure when it unveiled the company's future on the General Motors stage at this year's Detroit Auto Show.
Without GM, we would not have been standing talking to each other here today. It's absolutely a necessity for us. Capital injection, they have held us under the arm, so to speak. But then, of course, we have to pay back, so to speak, to the owners. We have a very ambitious product development plan, and we have to execute that, and we will grow the brand, and it will be over time a very good business for General Motors to have Saab in the family.
The 9X is also like a pickup. The car has a split tailgate and an extended load floor that telescopes from the rear at the push of a button. And like a wagon, the seatbacks fold flat to create a long load floor. This concept is a vision of the road ahead for Saab.
If you take the 9X that we presented in the Frankfurt the first time, and that's, you can say, a very, very dynamic 2+2 type of car for young families, but also for grown-up people that would like to have a sport and dynamic car. It would be very nice to have that car out in the market one day.
The 9.3X is not only closely related to the 9X, it's much more. It is a glimpse into the future of the new 9.3 lineup. It's a four-wheel drive, off-road capable car.
What you see in the 9.3X, you see much more of you can say, true car in that respect, that it's in the middle of the business where we should be with Saab. And some of the elements in this 9.3 you will also see in the 9.3 Replacer that will come out later this year. You will also see Saab cars then coming out with 4x4 system in this market, as some people talk about as SUV.
If we are evolving the design, the philosophy step by step, in small steps, maybe it will be very difficult to stay competitive. So we would like to create something a lot more dynamic, not more exciting, that would attract not only existing Saab fans, but also other customers as well.
If you're the kind of person that likes to count white horses rather than talk on the cell phone while you're driving, you probably don't like what you're seeing. This is the Media Mobile package developed by AMG for Mercedes-Benz. It is the ultimate office/entertainment system. Well, the company has only got a couple of these packages in vehicles in Europe right now, but they've been surprised at how large the demand has been. So it seems like this is the way of the future. But you know what? I know at least one guy that may not like this new trend, and that's our man in the Quaker State Garage, Bill Gardner.
Brad, there's my home office for the car, my trusty clipboard. I'll tell you, this thing's like my security blanket. It's got all my important phone numbers and notes about every car I've worked on in the last 6 months. Got my pen jammed in the binder here, and I'd be lost without that baby, I'll tell you. Anyhow, what I want to talk about this week is ignition coils and distributorless ignition systems. Now, if you remember 10 or 15 years ago, most vehicles had distributors. There's still a few cars today that have distributors, but not many. Many new cars have what we call distributorless ignition system. On the older cars with distributors, you had one single ignition coil, and the distributor, as its name implied, distributed the spark, roughly 30,000 volts, to all cylinders. Now, on the modern cars, you have multiple ignition coils. For example, on this V6 Oldsmobile, we've got this ignition coil pack, which is actually 3 ignition coils laminated together, each coil firing 2 cylinders. Now, on the older cars, when the ignition coil failed, they got towed in because you had no spark on any cylinder, one single coil responsible for all. But on these new cars, the cars will sometimes come in, drive into the shop, not running well, kind of running rough and ragged, with a bad ignition coil responsible for a miss on 1 or 2 cylinders. For example, if this 1-4 coil failed out of this coil package, it could run on the other 4 cylinders, misfire on these 2, and come limping into the shop with a rough idle. Now, in many cases, these misfires will start out in this fashion. For example, you're in high gear cruising along at 80 kilometers an hour, you come to a bit of a grade and the engine has to muscle a bit or lug a little bit, and as you're going up the grade, you'll feel a little bit of a shudder or jerk through the car. A lot of people chalk this up to, I've had people drive in and say there's something wrong with the transmission because there's a jerk through the whole car. In many cases, it's actually an ignition misfire. Now, the first thing you want to do is inspect the spark plugs and make sure they're in good shape. If they're not, you replace the spark plugs. The second thing you do is take an ohmmeter and read the spark plug wires. Make sure they're not open circuit or high resistance or damaged or worn in any way. If they're bad, you replace the plug wires. But in many cases, even with good plugs and good wires, you've got a misfire under load or 1 or more cylinders that won't fire. Then we go to the spark tester. This is a spark tester right here, simple looking little thing, looks like a spark plug. I've got it grounded but as yet unconnected. Back here at the rear bank of this engine, I've got a spark tester hooked up to cylinder number 4. And when we start the engine, go ahead and start it, you're going to see a spark. You can see that the coil is firing cylinder number 4. You can actually hear the spark and you can see it jumping the gap on the spark tester. Now shut it off. Now if I hook up the spark tester to cylinder number 1 as well, this ignition coil, if it were good, should be able to fire both these cylinders. The coil's weak, and when we start it up, go ahead and start it. We're not going to have a spark on either 1 or 4. Absolutely no spark. Now this coil's on the weak side, so those 2 cylinders under load are going to miss. Shut her off. Now, you don't want to drive a car around with a bad ignition coil or anything that's responsible for a misfire on 1 or more cylinders, because A, you waste fuel, B, you're polluting the air, unburned fuel going out of those cylinders that aren't firing, and you're going to fail an emission test. It's not good for the engine either to run with that misfire. It can harm the catalytic converter, and there's just all kinds of things that all kinds of reasons why you don't want to let your car go with this problem. So if you feel that little jerking or misfire under load, get it in, get it checked out, and get the parts replaced that are responsible. Until next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 2002.
professor at the University of Toronto has released a report which says the speed limit on our freeways, currently 100 or 110 kilometers an hour, should be increased to 130. He said it would make the roads safer. Well, the usual suspects are all up in arms. There'd be carnage on the roads. If the limit's 130, everybody go 150, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, that's not true. Other research shows that people travel at a speed they feel comfortable with. And that's a function of the car and the highway. If the highway's designed to be driven at 130K, like our freeways, that's where most people are going to drive. Guess what? The research shows 85% of traffic's already going between 120 and 130. So why is our law making criminals out of these people? And think about it. In a democracy, if 85% of the people are voting against the law every day, doesn't that tell you something? Besides, speed isn't a problem. Speed is the objective. I mean, if we weren't in a hurry, why would we have freeways in the first place? Do we want to still take 2 days to drive from province to province like we did in the old days? And then be on those 2-lane roads, they're 10 times more dangerous than freeways. Isn't that ironic? Our safest roads are our fastest roads. The safety mavens have never been able to figure that one out. Now the governments are saying, oh, we can't change, we got the safest roads, nothing's going to change, we're all right, Jack, don't worry us. Right, like we're perfect, we can't get any better? Well, this professor says we can have more speed and more safety. Surely that's worth taking a look at. I'm Jim Kenzie.
You know, there was a day when car makers, especially the Europeans, would turn pale at the thought of anybody customizing one of their products, unless it was racing. And although the relationship between AMG and Mercedes goes back a long way, it was just 10 years ago when Mercedes started to warm up to the idea. But meanwhile, here in Canada, Mercedes president Ernst Lieb was already getting requests from customers for that AMG look. So he simply ordered the parts from AMG in Europe and installed them on the cars here in Canada, way before it became reality in Europe. How about that? That's it for now. We'll see you next time out as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
Being able to communicate with the car communicate with you or with other cars is all things that who knows what the future might bring.
TSN's Motoring 2002 has been brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas. Keep a good thing going. Go Midas.